The Vexillian Confederacy had been waging wars for approximately 12,000 standard cycles, give or take a few centuries of peace that nobody really counted because they were boring. In that time, they'd conquered 47 star systems, subjugated 23 species, and perfected the art of ground-based combat to such a degree that their military academies taught courses with titles like Advanced Dirt Standing and Tactical Soil Positioning. Ground warfare was, after all, the only warfare that mattered. Every species in the known galaxy understood this fundamental truth. You took territory by putting boots, claws, tentacles, or whatever locomotive appendages you possessed on the ground and holding it. Crescent 9 existed as a cosmic middle finger to that entire philosophy. The planet sat in the outer reach territories like a beautiful, temperate death trap. From orbit, it looked positively lovely. Rolling hills covered in purple vegetation, crystal-clear rivers, atmospheric conditions that would make a resort developer weep with joy. The Confederacy's initial survey team had sent back data suggesting it would be an ideal colony world. Then they'd landed, and within 6 minutes, 3 of the 5 team members were dead. The ground, as it turned out, was carnivorous. Not metaphorically carnivorous in the way that difficult terrain could be described as eating up resources. Literally carnivorous. The soil itself contained millions of microscopic organisms that could strip flesh from bone in under 30 seconds. The geological formations weren't just rocks. They were crystalline predators that could detect vibration and pressure, then liquefy anything that stayed in contact with them for more than a few moments. Even the vegetation, lovely as it appeared, secreted a compound through its roots that turned the surrounding earth into a corrosive paste capable of dissolving standard military-grade boots in under 4 minutes. Multiple species had tried to conquer Crescent 9. The Thoraxian hive had lost an entire battalion, 12,000 soldiers, just gone, dissolved into the planet's hungry crust. The Zelnath Empire had attempted an assault using hover tanks, but the planet's magnetic field was so chaotic that anything hovering more than a meter off the ground spun out of control and crashed. The Kryn had tried using massive mechanized walkers, figuring that minimal ground contact would save them. The walkers had lasted almost 45 seconds before the pressure-sensitive geology had quite literally eaten through their feet. Crescent 9 remained unconquerable. And that was a problem because the planet sat on top of the largest deposit of Nexium crystals in the sector. Nexium powered everything from faster-than-light drives to weapons systems to the fancy coffee makers in military command centers. The Confederacy needed it. The enemy sovereignty claimed it. And the planet didn't care about either faction because it was too busy being a geological horror show. Which brought the situation to Admiral Krontex's office, where the three-eyed Vexillian commander sat reviewing files with the kind of desperate expression usually reserved for people who'd just realized they'd bet their entire career on an impossible mission. "Let me understand this correctly," Krontex said, his middle eye twitching in a way that suggested a migraine was forming. "You want to hire a human, Lieutenant Vex, a smaller Vexillian who'd somehow gotten stuck with recruitment duty, nodded enthusiastically. The mercenary registry says this one has a 97% mission success rate. The mercenary registry also lists them as creative tactician, which is code for does things that make no tactical sense but somehow survive. Krontex pulled up a holographic file. What's their name? Goes by Rook. Just Rook. Humans apparently think single name identification makes them sound mysterious. It makes them sound like they can't remember their full designation, Krontex muttered, scrolling through the file. Previous engagements include capturing a fortress by entering through the plumbing system, defeating an ambush by hiding in a pond, breathing through a reed, and winning a standoff by, is this correct? By pretending to be a local deity, the cultural research was apparently very thorough. Krontex's migraine intensified. Fine, bring them in. But if this human gets dissolved by the planet in the first 10 minutes, I'm deducting the hiring fee from your salary. Rook arrived 3 cycles later, and Krontex immediately understood why mercenaries developed reputations for being insufferable. The human stood at approximately 1.8 meters, tall for their species, average for most military personnel, with dark skin, close-cropped hair, and the kind of relaxed posture that suggested either supreme confidence or complete ignorance of danger. Possibly both. So, Rook said, studying the holographic display of Crescent 9, rotating in the center of the briefing room. The ground eats people. The ground, the rocks, the soil, the geological substrate. Yes, Krontex confirmed. Every conventional ground-based approach has failed. We're considering orbital bombardment, but that would destroy the Nexium deposits. And you can't hover because of the magnetic field. Correct. Can't dig tunnels. The subterranean layers are worse. More concentrated organisms, higher acidity. A drilling team made it down 4 meters before their equipment liquefied. Rook walked around the hologram, studying it from multiple angles. The human's eyes, brown, which Krontex found unsettling since Vexillians had never encountered a species that came in such varied ocular pigmentation, tracked across the terrain features with uncomfortable intensity. What about the trees? Rook finally asked. Krontex blinked all 3 eyes in sequence, a Vexillian gesture equivalent to a confused head shake. What about them? The purple vegetation. Are those trees? The survey data indicates woody plant life reaching heights between 15 and 40 meters. Yes, they're rooted into the carnivorous soil, but they've evolved to be immune to its effects. Why does this matter? Rook smiled, and Krontex felt a chill run down his dorsal ridge. He'd heard about human smiles. They were supposed to be friendly gestures, but when combined with that particular gleam in the eyes, they usually preceded something deeply uncomfortable for everyone else in the vicinity. I'm going to need timber, rope, a lot of rope, nails, hammers, pulleys, and several very good ladders, Rook said. Also, do you have anyone on staff who's decent at carpentry? Carpentry. Lieutenant Vex looked as confused as Krontex felt. The ancient human practice of wood shaping, the very same. Why in the name of the Confederacy would we need carpentry to fight a war? Rook's smile widened. Because I'm not fighting the war on the ground. I'm going to fight it from about 20 meters up. The briefing room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the holographic projector. Krontex stared at the human. Vex stared at the human. 3 other military advisors who'd been standing quietly in the corner stared at the human. You want to fight? Krontex said slowly from the trees. Yep, the trees that are anchored in the deadly carnivorous soil. Those exact trees, yes. This is your tactical plan. Tree-based warfare. You got it. Krontex felt his migraine evolve into something that might require medical attention. Human Rook, with all due respect, that is the most ridiculous combat strategy I have heard in my 300 cycles of military service. Yeah. Rook agreed cheerfully, but has anyone tried it? They had not, in fact, tried it. Which was how, 6 cycles later, Krontex found himself on a transport ship descending toward Crescent 9, accompanied by a human mercenary, 50 bewildered Confederacy soldiers, and enough lumber to build a small village. The initial landing was accomplished via long-range deployment cables from the hovering transport. They couldn't keep the ship stable for long, but they managed to deposit Rook, the supplies, and a handful of volunteers onto the upper branches of a cluster of massive purple trees before the magnetic interference forced them back to orbit. Krontex watched via drone feed from the ship, fully expecting to witness the galaxy's most expensive suicide. Instead, he watched Rook move through the treetops with the confidence of someone who'd spent their entire childhood doing exactly this. The human tested branches, selected strong intersections, and began constructing what appeared to be a platform using the timber they'd brought. Within 2 hours, there was a stable base. Within 6 hours, there was something resembling a structure. "Is the human building a house?" Lieutenant Vex asked, staring at the feed. "Appears to be," Krontex muttered. "In a tree." "Yes. During a military operation, apparently." By the end of the first cycle, Rook had constructed what could only be described as a treehouse, a wooden platform suspended 15 meters above the deadly ground, complete with walls, a roof, and what looked suspiciously like windows with shutters. The human had even carved a small sign that read Command Post Alpha and hung it above the entrance. The volunteers, 3 Vexillians who'd been brave enough or foolish enough to follow the human into the trees, had spent most of the cycle clinging to branches and trying not to look down at the ground that wanted to eat them. Rook had eventually coaxed them into helping, showing them how to move through the canopy, how to distribute weight, how to trust the branches. "Your species doesn't have arboreal heritage," one of the Vexillians, a soldier named Trevex, had protested. "How do you know how to do this?" "Every human kid builds tree houses," Rook had explained while hammering together support beams. "It's like a cultural imperative. You find a good tree, you build a fort in it. My cousin Derek had one with 3 levels and a rope ladder that could be pulled up when his little brother tried to invade. This is military strategy based on childhood play. Best kind of strategy. Already field-tested on territorial disputes with siblings." Trevex had looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't figure out where to start. By the third cycle, Command Post Alpha had expanded into Command Posts Beta, Gamma, and Delta, forming a network of elevated platforms connected by rope bridges and zip lines. Rook had established supply lines via pulley systems, allowing equipment and rations to be transported through the canopy without anyone needing to touch the ground. The human had even created observation posts at various heights, taking advantage of sight lines through the purple foliage. Krontex descended on one of the supply runs, using the cable system to lower himself into Command Post Alpha. He arrived to find Rook studying a tactical map spread across a makeshift table, marking positions with charcoal. "Admiral," Rook greeted without looking up. "Come to check if I've lost my mind." "That determination was made 3 cycles ago," Krontex replied. "I came to understand how this treehouse fortress constitutes a viable military strategy." Rook gestured to the map. "Every military species in the galaxy thinks in terms of ground territory. You take the ground, you hold the ground, you fight on the ground. It's so ingrained that nobody questions it. But on Crescent 9, the ground is the enemy. So we don't fight it, we ignore it entirely. By hiding in trees. Not hiding, operating from an elevated position with complete tactical advantage." Rook pointed to marked locations on the map. "From up here we have clear lines of sight across the entire valley where the Nexium deposits are concentrated. We can observe enemy movements without being detected because nobody looks up. We can transport supplies and personnel without exposure to surface hazards. We can establish overlapping fields of fire from multiple elevation points." "And if the enemy simply fires upward at your positions?" "They could if they knew we were here, but they won't because they're going to be focused on the ground, just like everyone else." Rook looked up, and that unsettling smile returned. "Besides, I've set up some surprises for anyone who tries ground assault." The human wasn't exaggerating. Over the following cycle, Rook demonstrated the defensive preparations, containers of the carnivorous soil organisms, carefully sealed and positioned to be dropped on advancing forces. Tripwires connected to modified local vegetation that would spray its corrosive compounds. Even more creative was a series of weighted nets that could be released from above, pinning soldiers against the deadly ground long enough for the planet to do the rest of the work. "That's horrifying," Krontex observed. "That's efficient," Rook corrected. "Why expend ammunition when the environment will do the work for you?" Over the next 2 cycles, Rook expanded the network to include 12 interconnected platforms, creating what was essentially an aerial military base. The human had recruited more volunteers. Word had spread that nobody in the tree network had died yet, which made it statistically the safest position in the entire operation, and trained them in vertical warfare tactics. The training was, from Krontex's perspective, absolutely insane. "You want them to swing from position to position?" he'd asked, watching Rook demonstrate how to use rope swings to move quickly between platforms. Faster than walking across bridges, harder to track, and honestly more fun. Fun should not be a tactical consideration. Fun keeps morale high, and high morale keeps soldiers alive. Krontex couldn't argue with that logic, mainly because he was too disturbed by the sight of trained military personnel learning to use ziplines like children at a recreation facility. But he had to admit that the volunteers were becoming proficient. Trevex, who'd been terrified on the first cycle, was now confidently traversing between platforms, using a combination of rope bridges and ziplines. Others were learning to move through the natural branches, finding paths through the canopy that didn't require constructed routes. Rook had also established a rotation system, ensuring that soldiers got regular rest periods on the transport ship in orbit. Fresh volunteers cycled in, learning from the experienced ones, creating a growing force of tree-trained personnel. The human had even developed hand signals for silent communication between platforms, adapting traditional military signals for 3-dimensional space. "You're building an entire combat doctrine," Krontex observed during one of his visits. "Someone has to," Rook replied. "Otherwise this only works once. But if we can teach it, document it, make it reproducible, at least for species with the right physical capabilities, then it becomes a legitimate tactical option. For the 5% of scenarios where the ground is actively trying to murder everyone, hey, 5% of scenarios is better than 0% of scenarios. Specialization has value." The sovereignty forces arrived in the 6th cycle, and they arrived in force, 3 battalions of Kryn warriors, heavily armored and equipped with the kind of firepower that could level a small city. They deployed from low-orbit dropships, landing with the thunderous impact that ground-based military operations were famous for. Then they tried to move forward, and Crescent 9 reminded them why it remained unconquered. Krontex watched from Command Post Alpha as the Kryn forces struggled with the terrain. Their heavy armor protected them from the carnivorous soil for longer than unarmored troops, but longer meant 5 minutes instead of 30 seconds. They tried spreading their weight using wide stance movement, but the pressure-sensitive geology responded to anything touching it. They attempted rapid advancement, thinking speed would save them, but that just meant they died faster. Within an hour, the Kryn had lost a quarter of their forces simply to the planet. "They're going to pull back and reassess," Rook predicted, watching through binoculars. "And when they return?" Krontex asked. "They'll try the same thing again, but with different equipment. Ground-based militaries always do. They can't conceptualize alternatives." Rook was right. The Kryn returned 12 hours later with hover platforms designed to keep soldiers off the ground. The platforms worked for approximately 7 minutes before the magnetic field interference caused 3 of them to crash. The survivors attempted to continue on foot, returning to the previous problem of soil that wanted to eat them. From the elevated network of tree houses, Rook coordinated the first active engagement. It wasn't a battle in any conventional sense. There were no charges, no defensive lines, no ground held or lost. Instead, Rook's forces simply made the Kryn's impossible situation worse. Supply drops from above landed behind enemy lines, providing materials but also creating chaos. Rook's team used the zip lines to rapidly relocate, appearing at different observation posts to call out enemy positions. The human had even set up a series of pulley-based launchers that could drop containers of non-lethal but incredibly annoying compounds onto Kryn positions. Acidic paste from the local vegetation, collections of the soil organisms sealed in breakable containers, and in one particularly creative moment, a swarm of local flying insects that Rook had discovered were attracted to the electromagnetic signatures of Kryn armor. The insects were perhaps the most demoralizing element. They didn't cause physical harm, but they obscured vision, infiltrated armor joints, and created enough distraction that the already struggling Kryn forces descended into complete disarray. Soldiers trying to swat away insects while simultaneously avoiding carnivorous soil made for a spectacle that was both tragic and darkly comedic. The Kryn fought valiantly against an enemy they couldn't reach, on terrain that was killing them, while being harassed from above by forces that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Their commanding officers attempted to coordinate responses, but every time they established a temporary safe position, something would drop from above to disrupt it. They retreated after 18 hours, leaving behind equipment they couldn't recover and casualties they couldn't retrieve. The planet claimed everything that remained on the ground. Did we just win? Trevex asked, staring at the drone footage of Kryn forces pulling back to their landing zone. We didn't let them get near the Nexium deposits, and we didn't lose a single soldier, Rook said. Yeah, I'd call that a win. By throwing bugs at them. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. Krontex found himself agreeing, which was perhaps the most disturbing realization of the entire operation. The Confederacy High Command, monitoring from orbit, struggled to process what they'd witnessed. General Thexis, a 4-armed Quilner who'd been commanding military operations for 600 cycles, cycled through the drone recordings 3 times before speaking. The human didn't engage in direct combat, Thexis said slowly. No, General, Krontex confirmed. Didn't establish ground positions, didn't hold territory, didn't follow any conventional tactical doctrine. Also correct. Instead built a series of children's play structures in the trees and won through environmental harassment and superior observation positions. That is an accurate, if reductive, summary. The Exis's 4 arms gestured in a pattern that indicated profound confusion mixed with reluctant admiration. How did we not think of this? Because we're not insane primates who spent our formative years climbing things we shouldn't climb, Krontex replied. Our species evolved in environments where vertical thinking wasn't necessary. Humans apparently spent millions of years swinging through trees and never forgot how. It seems like a significant evolutionary oversight on our part. Evolution optimizes for survival, not for conquering planets with carnivorous geology. Over the next 3 cycles, other species attempted to replicate Rook's strategy. The results ranged from disappointing to catastrophically hilarious. The Vexillians, despite being roughly humanoid, lacked the grip strength and proprioception necessary for confident tree climbing. 3 soldiers made it into the canopy before becoming paralyzed with fear and requiring rescue. Their vertical orientation was fine, but something about being surrounded by empty space with deadly ground below triggered panic responses that training couldn't override. The Thoraxians couldn't manage it at all. Their exoskeletal structure was too rigid, and their multiple limbs kept getting tangled in branches. One ambitious Thoraxian made it 4 meters up before getting stuck in a fork between 2 branches and requiring a 2-hour extraction operation. The Quilner did slightly better thanks to their 4 arms, but their ceremonial dignity couldn't survive the indignity of rope swings and ziplines. General Thexis personally attempted the training and made it approximately 3 minutes before declaring that the Quilner military would provide support roles but would not be participating in aerial acrobatics. The Zelnath, who were quadrupedal, couldn't even figure out how to start climbing. Their body plan simply didn't accommodate vertical surfaces that required gripping. "It's the primate thing," Rook explained to Krontex during a strategy meeting. "Humans evolved from tree-dwelling ancestors. It's literally in our DNA to feel comfortable at heights, to understand 3-dimensional movement through branches, to trust that we can grab something and not fall. Your species evolved on flat plains or underground or in oceans. You're built for different environments. So this strategy only works because of your species' arbitrary evolutionary history. Yep, millions of years of swinging through trees, and now we're using it to win wars. Evolution is weird. And the psychological component. The comfort with empty space beneath you. That's probably cultural as much as biological," Rook admitted. "Human children play in trees, climb playground equipment, learn that falling isn't always fatal if you know how to do it right. We develop an intuition for it. Your species don't have that cultural framework, so we'd need to not only overcome our physical limitations, but also reprogram our entire psychological relationship with vertical space. Pretty much. Which is why I'm documenting everything, but I'm not expecting this to become standard practice for anyone except humans. Maybe a few other species with appropriate backgrounds, but it's definitely niche." The Sovereignty made 2 more attempts to take Crescent 9, each more desperate than the last. They tried artillery bombardment, but Rook's elevated network was dispersed enough that no single strike could eliminate it, and the tree canopy provided surprising protection from shrapnel. The massive trunks absorbed impacts that would have devastated ground-based fortifications. They attempted infiltration by individual scouts, but Rook had trained the volunteers in elevated patrol patterns that covered every approach. The scouts were spotted long before they got close to any objective, and several made the fatal mistake of trying to hide on the ground. They even tried negotiation, offering to share the Nexium deposits, but the Confederacy, emboldened by their sudden tactical advantage, declined. Why share when they'd found a way to maintain exclusive control? By the 4th week, Crescent 9 was officially under Confederacy control, and not a single Confederacy soldier had set foot on its deadly ground. Mining operations began using variations of Rook's aerial infrastructure, with drilling equipment lowered from elevated platforms to extract Nexium without anyone needing to touch the surface. The award ceremony took place on the Confederacy flagship, which was fortunate because Rook's Treehouse network didn't have facilities for formal military honors. Krontex presented the human with the Star of Tactical Excellence, the Confederacy's highest military decoration, while trying not to think about how ridiculous the entire situation was. "You revolutionized warfare by building childhood forts," Krontex said during the ceremony. "That sentence shouldn't make sense, yet here we are." "To be fair, they were very well-built childhood forts," Rook replied, accepting the medal. "Derek would be proud." Who is Derek? My cousin, the one with the 3-level treehouse. He's probably still bragging about it. The assembled military officials didn't know how to respond to that, so they applauded politely and tried to pretend they understood what had happened. Lieutenant Vex approached after the ceremony with a data tablet. The Confederacy wants to offer you a permanent position as tactical consultant. Hard pass, Rook said immediately. I work better as an independent contractor, but I'll write up the doctrine documentation, train any humans you recruit for similar operations, and stay available for consultation on weird scenarios. Weird scenarios? Situations where conventional military thinking isn't working. I guarantee you've got more Crescent 9 situations out there, different problems, same need for lateral thinking. Vex looked at Krontex, who gave a resigned gesture. The human isn't wrong. We've already identified 3 other planets in contested zones with environmental conditions that make ground warfare impractical. See? Rook grinned. I'll send you my rate sheet. In the following months, vertical warfare doctrine was added to Confederacy military academies as a specialized field of study. It came with the caveat that it was only practical for species with appropriate evolutionary backgrounds, and when fighting on terrain where traditional ground operations were impossible. A few ambitious officers tried to apply it to conventional battlefields and discovered that while fighting from trees was theoretically interesting, it was significantly less effective when the enemy could simply burn down the trees or shoot upward with heavy weapons. Rook, for their part, took the payment from the Crescent 9 contract and disappeared back into the mercenary circuit. Last reports placed them on a planet with extensive canyon systems, where apparently the human had proposed some kind of bridge-based fortress network spanning between cliff faces. Krontex received the intelligence report and filed it under probably insane but will somehow work. The Confederacy Intelligence Service created a new classification system for human tactical innovations, Type R proposals, named after Rook, which indicated strategies that violated all conventional military logic, but showed historical precedent for success. Any Type R proposal automatically went to a specialized review board trained to evaluate ideas based on creative potential rather than adherence to doctrine. Krontex received regular updates on the humans' activities, mainly because Confederacy intelligence kept flagging them as concerning tactical innovations that defy conventional military logic. The Admiral had learned to ignore these reports, having accepted that humans operated on a completely different strategic wavelength from every other species in the galaxy. He did, however, approve funding for a research project studying human childhood development and its applications to military training. If tree climbing as a juvenile activity produced such significant tactical advantages, perhaps other human childhood behaviors had military applications. The early results were promising, if baffling. Something called hide and seek apparently taught advanced stealth techniques. Tag developed pursuit and evasion instincts, and King of the Hill was essentially small unit tactical combat training. They train their children for war by calling it play, one researcher observed. They train their children for creative problem solving by letting them build forts and get into trouble, another corrected. The military applications are incidental. Either way, it explained a lot about why humans were so devastatingly effective at unconventional warfare. In the end, the battle for Crescent 9 became a case study in lateral thinking, taught in military schools across the Confederacy, with titles like When Conventional Wisdom Fails and Environmental Adaptation in Hostile Theaters. The fact that it was essentially won by someone who remembered their childhood with unusual clarity was quietly omitted from most official accounts, because military historians preferred their victories to sound dignified rather than absurd. The ground remained dangerous. The trees remained occupied. And somewhere in the galaxy, a human mercenary was probably building another impossible structure in another impossible location, because when conventional approaches failed, humans just stopped being conventional. The Confederacy's military doctrine had been forever altered by someone who'd apparently learned everything they needed to know about warfare from playing in the backyard. And if that wasn't the most human thing imaginable, Krontex couldn't imagine what would be. High Command added a new entry to their tactical database. When employing human operatives, always check whether they're thinking vertically, horizontally, or in some other direction you haven't considered. Assume the answer is the third option. It was, Krontex reflected, the most useful piece of military intelligence the Confederacy had generated in centuries, and it had cost them nothing but their dignity, and one very expensive treehouse that turned out to be worth every credit. 3 months later, Krontex received a message from Rook. It contained no text, just an image of a rope bridge suspended between two canyon walls, with a small sign reading Command Post Alpha version 2.0 inches hanging from the center. The Admiral stared at the image for a long moment, then forwarded it to the Type R review board with a note. Approved. Don't ask questions, just send the lumber. Because sometimes, the most advanced military strategy in the galaxy came down to trusting that a human's childhood instincts were more reliable than 10,000 years of conventional warfare doctrine. And on planets where the ground wanted to eat you, that trust was worth its weight in Nexium.